and much colder, only 57 for a high on Thursday.
Thanks, Chris. And the National Safety Council says distracted driving is one of the leading causes of crashes in South Carolina. Teen drivers have a higher rate of distraction, and that was addressed this week in Oconee County. Students at high school there were able to take part in a distracted driving simulator, getting behind the wheel of a virtual SUV to track how they react to different dangerous scenarios at a time when there could be more teen drivers on the road.
And this is the time of year we really see, between winter sports, we'll also see a bumper crop of kids that come in and they're applying for jobs out in the community, and they're working in those fast food restaurants or whatever grocery stores and whatnot.
Students also operated golf carts while wearing goggles to simulate driving while impaired. And the lead defense attorney on the Lonnie Simon murder, and Hurricane Helene left more than 1 million South Carolina homes and businesses in the dark for days and for more than a few days and even longer. That darkness sparked a common question: will South Carolina start burying more power lines to prevent widespread outages in the future? Mary Green has the answer from leaders at the State House and utilities.
Snapped and downed power lines, a common sight across dozens of South Carolina counties in the wake of Helene, leaving many to wonder if the devastation from the storm will prompt more above-ground power lines to be buried.
It'd be a good investment if you get somebody to pay for it, but money's not free.
Bob Pauling is the CEO of Mid-Carolina Electric Cooperative, one of the state's 18 co-ops, which collectively provide power to about a third of South Carolinians. He says the cost of burying power lines can be around 10 to 15 times more expensive than installing above-ground lines. Just for Mid-Carolina, he says that could easily be about a $2 billion price tag, and about a third of its lines are already below the ground.
To put all the power lines underground, just in case another major hurricane comes in the next 100 years, would just be a really, really, really interesting business decision to make.
State House leaders have pledged to put South Carolina's recovery after Helene at the top of their priorities when lawmakers gavel back in here in January. But based on early conversations, their focus is not on what the state's role in burying power lines might be.
Obviously, we will come back and look at issues, how we can mitigate some of these disasters, but one thing that we know about burying power lines is it's very, very expensive.
There have been some issues, even with the storm, in some of the areas where there have buried power lines, so it's not a one size solves that issue, so I think we just have to have more evaluation.
In press briefings following the immediate aftermath of Helene, Governor Henry McMaster told reporters he believed the government could have a role in this work, but not in Columbia.
That would be a good federal project, but they're expensive, but we wouldn't have some of the problems we have now if we had more in certain places, and of course that would save us a lot of these expenses. But there are a lot of discussions. Every time we have something like this, we learn things that we can do a little bit better.
Obviously, the utilities, those costs are passed on to the ratepayers. So I would agree with the governor. This would be a great federal issue for them to engage in.
Bob Pauling from Mid-Carolina also says underground power lines aren't a silver bullet for outages, especially with so much of the state prone to flooding. He says in general, while it takes more effort to knock out power to underground lines than above ground lines, it also takes longer to restore it.
Oh, Saturday was a beautiful day out there. The average high is 69 degrees. The high yesterday in Augusta, 70, and you even hit 71 there in Millen. Today looks a lot like yesterday. It should be a nice day. If there are changes on the way, we'll have another check on your forecast coming up.
It's Christmas time again, and Carol...
Thursday and Friday, but it will be windy and much colder. Highs only in the 50s by Thursday and Friday.
Thanks, Chris. And state lawmakers looking closely at Georgia's prison system, criticized time and time again after reports of prisoner neglect and violence. Abigasaurus explains how state lawmakers are asking tough questions as they work to figure out what the Department of Corrections needs.
Some of the state's top lawmakers creating a special study committee, working with the Department of Corrections and their budgetary needs. On the top of their wish list, raises for employees, improvements to inmate health care options, and infrastructure needs like new facilities and creating more single-cell beds.
This is by far the toughest mission in public safety, period.
Georgia's Department of Corrections Commissioner Tyrone Oliver handing over the latest data to state lawmakers. Georgia has the fourth highest state prison population in the country, nearly 50,000 inmates. The average inmate is 40 years old, serving a 12-year sentence. 74% are serving time for violent offenses like homicide, aggravated assault, or kidnapping. 93% of the beds are full. Last year, there were 47 homicides statewide. The majority of homicides are carried out by cellmates, which is why they try to separate inmates into single cells. But most of the state's prisons can only offer bunks or dual cells.
The violent population, that's becoming a challenge for us just because it's hard to manage double bunk, let alone triple bunk inmates inside of one cell.
Contraband drives violence and illegal activity. Last year, more than 10,000 cell phones were confiscated, 19,000 weapons. He says crime organizations, mostly foreign, are using drones for contraband drops. Federal and state agencies are trying to keep up.
It might come as a surprise to you, but you got a hell of a public relations problem out in the state.
Midway State Rep Al Williams hit the nail on the head. In a 93-page report last month, the Department of Justice alleges prison officials are deliberately indifferent to unchecked deadly violence, widespread drug use, extortion, and sexual abuse.
Can't turn a blind eye to the wretched conditions and wanton violence unfolding in these institutions.
They're threatening to sue the state if no changes are made.
And I think everybody's hard in. Let's see a better prison system here in Georgia. It's necessary, unfortunately.
The governor's office commissioned an additional study after the DOJ's report. The committee is hopeful they'll be able to see that report before entering into budget negotiations in January. In Atlanta, I'm Abby Kasouris.
The FBI is working to find the source of the racist text messages sent out to Black Americans, including some at Clemson University. Days later, students are still on edge. Kennedy Harris has more.
Many people were blowing up the chat, asking about it, like, why they send this to me.
Clemson senior R.J. Polite was playing video games with friends Wednesday when he got a message. Congratulations, you have now been selected to pick cotton for President Trump 2024.
And I was like kind of mind blowing that it happened.
As were other students who got similar messages.
Just opening the chat and seeing like how they